Okay, so before we do the quadratic formula, let's review all the ways that we have already done to solve quadratics. Solving quadratics is what we're doing. That's the whole point of this. So the first way to solve quadratics is just BS. Or typically is like the square root method. You can do this when there's no b. If you don't know what that means, it's like there's no middle term. It's just, for example, y equals 4x squared minus 36. Okay, so there's no plus 2x or whatever in there at all. Okay, so the way you solve this is you set it equal to 0, and you do da-da-da. Okay, so 4x squared equals 36 divided by 4, and then x equals plus or minus 3. Okay, so that's one way to do. This is the easiest way to solve quadratic equations, but it really doesn't work that often. It's a shortcut. It's the best way, but it only works with like a very small amount of problems because there's no middle term.
So that one only works when the axis of symmetry is the y-axis?
Yep, when there's, the same way as saying there's no middle term. Pretty much because there's only one x, there's not a second x over here. Okay, so that's the one way. The second way to solve, and this is what we just spent the last couple of days on, is factoring. I actually really like factoring the best. I think it's, I don't know why, I just think factoring is fun. Maybe it's because I'm a big giant nerd, but whatever. Factoring is the second way to do it. So for example, if I have y equals, let's do, I think that works. Yeah, that works. Okay, so let's say this. So you can't square root because there's x's in two spots, so you will never be able to just get the x alone. So what we do is we just set it equal to 0 again, as always. We get our parentheses. Okay, x. Okay, what multiplies to negative 70 and adds to negative 3? In this case, it would be minus 10 plus 7. Okay, so our two answers would be x equals 10 or x equals negative 7. So this is actually really quick if you can factor it. Like if it's what is called a monic, so like if it's 1x squared and you briefly look at these things and you can factor them, do it. It's going to save you a lot of time. There's a couple other methods that we kind of skipped over. There's a completing the square method. So if you really want to do all of the math, the next way is completing the square. That was 9.5. I typically skip it just because it's dumb. Okay, it's pretty much just the same thing as the quadratic formula, just with extra steps, and you can do it in your head. But it's extra steps, and it's actually kind of really hard to understand the process of it. It just typically confuses more students, so I stopped doing it because every single problem you can complete the square with, you can just factor or you can quadratic formula. So these are the three methods that are quote-unquote shortcuts. Okay, now let's do the real quadratic formula. And you do need to have it memorized. And let me try to find that video. Oh yeah, here we go. It's not loading. Come on, let's go. It's not that long of a video. It's 23 seconds. What the heck is going on with my internet? Have you guys all watched the video yet?
I haven't.
I have not.
It won't let me screen share. This is bogus. Let me try that.
I mean, you could try leaving the meeting and then coming back.
Here we go. Here we go. All right, you guys all see my Google Chrome now?
Yeah.
All right. So, in the past, all 8 other years I've taught this, I have made it a requirement for every single person to sing the quadratic formula in front of the entire class. So you guys are actually really lucky. I always let people get like a cheat sheet on their test, but only if they sang this song in front of the entire class. And I've only had like 3 kids not do it. One of them was last year. I forgot who it was, but he did fine. But yeah, so you got to memorize this. This is the quadratic formula.
The quadratic formula's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
That's it. That's the quadratic formula. So let's stop. Let's write that down, and then we're going to explain what the heck that means. Because you're probably looking at that, and you're like, not having it. It looks really complex. It is actually probably one of the most complex formulas that we have in math. But it's really useful, so people just memorize it, and then it's not an issue. So remember, when we solving quadratics means finding the zeros, aka roots, aka x-intercepts. Okay? So what the quadratic formula does, you just plug in a whole bunch of numbers, and it just instantly just poof, it just tells you where it is. I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time proving it. I can prove why it works, but I mean, maybe we can do that next week. But for now, I just want to get some practice in using it. So the quadratic formula is x equals, so like solving it gives you the x-intercepts. This is where it's going to hit the x-axis. So for example, if I draw a parabola like this, just a random one, and if I plug in everything, it'll tell me this exact location. It'll tell me this exact location. That's the value of this quadratic formula. So
Wait, so we're going to have to do it twice?
Yes and no at the same time. Before we write that down, remember that the quadratic formula only works if you have a quadratic that looks like this. Okay, this is standard form. This is why we've kind of hammered this in. Like, you always thought like, oh, it was just mathematicians being just weirdos and just being like super particular for no reason. There's a huge reason for it. A is the number in front of x squared, B is the number in front of x, and C is the constant, or the number alone. Okay? So if you have an equation in this form, all you need to do to find those 2 points is you take the quadratic formula's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So literally, you can do any problem just by plugging stuff in there. And it'll instantly give you the answer. Well, not instantly, but without any thought, it'll give you the answer. So as long as you plug in the numbers in the right locations, you'll get every answer correct every time.
What if there's no C?
There's always a C. There's not a single quadratic that doesn't have a C. So what do I mean by that? what do you mean when you say there's no C?
I guess it'd just be plus 0, but you can put 0.
Yes. So if there's no C, it's a 0. If there's no B, B is 0. If there's no A is 0. That sort of thing. Okay. So I'm going to automatically generate a couple of problems. Whoops, that's what I want. Okay. So we're going to start with a problem that you would probably never do by quadratic formula. So I'm going to erase all this because I do have it all memorized and I need more space. So we're going to solve a problem y equals x squared minus 10x plus 9. Okay, this is what we're going to solve, and we're going to solve it using the quadratic formula. So I'm going to write my equation, negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so now step 1 is plug all the a, b, and c in. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to do any math. Okay, so step 1, the opposite of b. So b, well, actually before I even do step 1, sometimes what kids like to do is they like to do a step 0. And step 0 is, what is A? A is 1. What is B? B is negative 10. And what is C? C is 9. Okay, so this is like the pre-step. We're not actually doing any formula plugging in yet. But it is important to know what A, B, and C are. So then step 1 is plug them in. So this says, it says negative B, but be very careful with that. I would rather think about it as the opposite of B, because negative signs just mean opposite. So instead of a negative 10, like it's a negative 10, I'm going to put plus 10. Okay, so positive 10 plus or minus square root b squared. Okay, so this is where you can kind of do a little bit of work in your head. So b is technically negative 10. So if you're good with parentheses, you can put negative 10 squared. If you're really bad with parentheses, well, isn't anything squared going to be a positive number? So you can kind of just do 10 squared if you really want to. I know a lot of kids that they'll square stuff and they'll do, oh, what's negative 10 squared? Negative 100. No, it's not. You just typed it in wrong to your calculator. So there are a lot of calculator errors right here. Minus 4. Why is it 4? It just is. It's 4. It's always 4. A is 1. And C is 9. All over 2 times 1. Okay, so step 1, plug everything in. Okay. Step 2 is, I like to simplify the square root. So here's some vocab that is going to be on your homework. All of this stuff, the stuff under the square root, that's called the discriminant. And I know we live in 2020 where that probably sounds really bad, but discrimination is not necessarily a bad thing. Discrimination is how you treat things differently, okay? So this discriminant determines whether there are going to be 0, 1, or 2 solutions. So that's what it discriminates. It shows the differences between those 3 options, okay? So what we're going to do is I like to simplify the discriminant first. So I rewrite everything else. 10 plus or minus, and I'm even going to simplify that as just 2. Okay, so now this is 10 squared is 100, minus 4 times 1 times 9, that's 36. Okay, now I'm going to continue simplifying the discriminant. That's going to be 64. Okay, so now this discriminant is a positive number. So if it's positive, that means I'm going to get 2 solutions. Okay, so looking at that, let's see. 10 plus or minus 8 all over 2. Okay, so this is where, like at the beginning, Samantha said, wait, we have to do this twice. And I said, yes, but not really. This is where you do it twice because of the plus or minus. So step 3 is where you're like, okay, let's do one version. That's the positive version. 10 plus 8 over 2 is 9. And let's do the other one, which is the negative version, which is 10 minus 8 over 2. So let's see, 2 over 2 is 1. Boom. So
Can you put your camera down?
Oopsie. Sorry. So those are our two solutions. So rewriting my final answer is step 4. I'd get x equals 9 or x equals 1. I just solved this quadratic using the quadratic formula. Okay? Now, like I said, the quadratic formula is the best because it always works. If I solve the quadratic formula and I get an answer like this, if they're whole numbers, it means there's always a shortcut that I could have taken. So instead of doing all of this work, I could have been like, okay, I notice that I can factor this into x minus 9, x minus 1. Oh, cool, x equals 9, x equals 1. So I literally could have done this problem in about 10 seconds. But if I don't realize that, or if I don't want to think too hard, that's where the quadratic formula comes in. You can just plug it in, and yeah, it takes a long time, but it's just basic algebra. And realistically, most of you guys are just probably going to do all of this in your head and just like skip down to this final step. So yeah. So it's long, but it's not difficult. Now, quadratic formula, I would never use quadratic formula for that problem. I was just showing you with nice numbers how to do it. So now let's do the quadratic formula. I have a program to make up problems. I think I'm just not going to use that program. I think I'm just going to make up numbers off the top of my head. Let's do, let's get a negative in there. Negative 3x squared minus, let's do 15x plus 50. Okay?
One question.
Yeah.
Do we write our final answer as x equals, like for the last one, x equals 9 and x equals 1?
So it's not
like
and,
that?
it's or. It's x equals 9 or x
okay.
equals 1. Because a number cannot be 9 and 1, if that makes sense. Okay, so a lot of you were thinking at that last problem, and I showed you how you could do it in 10 seconds. You're like, well, I'm never going to do quadratic formula. You're wrong. So first of all, who wants to factor this? Not me, because that's a negative, and I don't even think we have ever factored with negatives. So typically, what you should do when you attack problems is you should if b is 0, obviously just solve it normally. Second, check to see if it's factorable. Typically, it's really easy to see if it's factorable if it's just 1x squared. But if it's like a 3x squared, you can use the Leeds-Taylor method if you want. But remember, that method takes a long time. So you might as well just save your time and do the quadratic formula because that guarantees works. It guarantees that it works and you don't have to like actually think too hard. You just plug stuff in. So let's get right to it with the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Did you guys sing along with me? I know you're all muted, but I bet you all sang along with me.
No.
Alright, so step 0, I'm going to figure out what is my A, what is my B, what is my C. All right, so A is -3, B is -15, and C is 50. Okay? All right, so now step 1 is I plug everything in. Okay? The opposite of B is going to be 15. B squared. Okay, so remember this is where I said like just make it positive because anything squared is going to be positive. So instead of writing -15 squared, I'm just going to do 15 squared. Because here, let me show the reason why I actually do that. So there's kids that like really just don't use calculators, and then when they get the wrong answer, they blame the calculator when really it's their fault. So if I type in -15 squared, okay?
It gives you negative.
Right. Everyone knows that -15 times -15 is going to be a positive. But when we do this, my calculator gives -225. So if you make this one mistake, you're going to get every single problem wrong. So even though I'm supposed to do parentheses -15 squared, that's what you're supposed to do, square the entire number. It's just easier for your brain and for your pencil if you just write 15 squared. So I don't really care if you're technically not doing it correctly. Just write the 15. All right. So we've got 15 squared minus 4, because it's a 4 always, times A times C. All over 2A. Okay, so step 2 is do the discriminant. So I took a lot of space last time, so I'm actually going to do this a little bit differently this time. I'm just going to just rewrite all this stuff. So 15 squared is 225 minus, okay, so this is another place where people make a lot of errors. They forget to use multiply signs and they just subtract stuff, or they forget about the number of negatives here. But look, -4 times -3, that's positive 12. So it's plus 12. 12 times 50. What is that? 12 times 50. I think that's 600. Yeah, plus 600. Okay, so that's going to be 825. Okay, so I have now x equals 15 plus or minus the square root of 825 all over -6. Okay, now, since this problem was probably not factorable, I don't think this is actually going to be a rational number. I think it's going to be an irrational. If you remember about my rock story with Mickey and all of his thieving skills, irrationals can't be written as fractions, so that would mean it's not possible to factor. 825 square root. Okay, so that doesn't work out nicely at all. I mean, yeah, I got a really gross number. So we have two options. First option is we can write our answer as an actual, the perfect answer, not rounded at all. So what we could do is we could write 15 plus root 825 over -6. And then we could also write 15 minus root 825 over -6. But like, realistically, to a human being, does that really mean anything? No. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the decimal approximation. So since we already have irrational numbers, I probably want to know, like, okay, what is that? Is this 12? Is it 37? I don't even know what that is. So I'm going to just type it all in. So 15 plus that, enter, divided by -6. Okay, so my first answer, this top one, I got, here, let me go down a little bit. I got x is approximately, so I rounded now, -7.287, or x is approximately, now let's do the bottom one, 15 minus square root 825, enter, then divided by -6, 2.287. So that's interesting. This 287, that must be like the remainder for this square root. So it looks like there is some pattern there, but yeah. Okay. So this problem is literally impossible to do without the quadratic formula or like a graphing calculator. So there will be a problem like this where you have to do it by hand, and I need to be able to see you do all of this algebra. So let's see, this was what, step 3, this was step 4. Okay, so that's the quadratic formula. Unfortunately, we're like totally out of time. I didn't realize that. I realized we never actually wrote down what step 1, 2, 3, and 4 are, so we will probably do that next week. This is not going to be due Monday. It's probably going to be due Tuesday, so we're going to spend 3 days on this. But yeah, take a look at that, that worksheet. Try to get started. Remember, this, whatever is underneath the square root, that's called the discriminant. And it determines whether or not there are 0, 1, or 2 solutions. And we'll talk more about that next week, but we're just out of time for today. Okay? Kind of wish we had a little bit more time, but that'll have to do it.
What are the 2 answers again?
So if I have these 2 answers, so what do they mean? So if I graph this, so first of all, it's a -3x squared, so I know it's an upside down u. And I know it's going to be an upside down u, it's like this. This right here, that x-intercept, that's going to be about 2.287. And this one is going to be -7.287. So it tells us when it hits the axis.
Okay, I think I have to do it slightly differently in my calculator because the answers I got from my calculator weren't lining up with yours.
Okay, so let me see. Did you get 10.213?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I got when I did it wrong. So what is wrong about this? Well, the way that order of operations works is only the square root of 825 is being divided right now. So you need to insert parentheses on top there. Or what I just do is I just press enter and then I divide. But because in the quadratic formula song, it specifically says all over 2a. So you need to divide everything over 2a. And if I type enter.
If I did it separately, I got the right answer.
Yeah. Either way, I think doing it separately is easier than parentheses because parentheses are honestly just kind of annoying. All right. Well, I will let you guys go. Get to your work.